Hello, welcome back to my channel. I appreciate you stopping by today to check out my latest video. Today I'm going to be showing a lot of different pieces of a solution or a way to generate automation solutions using free developer tools and free platforms. We'll be taking a look at Python, some free tools like SQL Server and Visual Studio, SQL agents, various different server technologies, API calls, SQL databases, some C# scripting, automation, DTSX packages, scheduling those packages using a built-in scheduler platform, the SSIS platform or integration services platform. We'll throw in some AI, some Gemini, some Nano Banana. Also, as I mentioned, Visual Studio. I have 2019 and 2022 installed on this machine, and VS Code to take a look at the Python code. I'll be looking at passing parameters into the running packages, also how to use those environments and environment variables. And there's a really great tool called Kingswaysoft, and I'll probably touch on a few other things. So that's a lot, let's get to it. In another recent video I had made, I talked about the N8N platform and how it can be set up and used for doing many different kinds of automation. So we'll be taking a look at another way to do automation with all these free tools for developers. There's no specific good place to start because there's so many things to talk about. So I opened up some browser tabs and I want to go ahead and just point out some of these free tools that you can download. The first one is Kingswaysoft. It is actually an amazing tool that you can do so many different backend integrations with pretty much almost everything you can think of. I'm going to scroll through this page real quick so we can take a look. There's like 300 different tools. Right here they say 300 individual data integration tools for connectivity and productivity. And I've used it for doing various different kinds of integrations, both on an input and an output side. For business intelligence, ETLs, like nightly extract, transform, and load processes, reporting, and so many other things. I have found that working with Kingswaysoft has been awesome. They're a great company and their tools are really fun to use. Here is the SSIS Productivity Pack. That's what I will be covering in this video, or if the video gets to be too long, I may have to talk about it in another video in more detail. So here you can see how we can talk to REST services or web services, deal with cloud storage, distributed databases, relational databases, which is what I will be also showing in this video or the next one, doing various different data integrations, data transformations, ETL, productivity, data quality, and so many other things. And it's really nice that they have the free developer license. As a developer, you can use all of these different components and try them out. Here is some of the more than the 300 components you'll find in this SSIS Productivity Pack. And I actually have installed it on this machine. I was going to show this here. If we scroll down a little bit, we can see right here, SSIS Productivity Pack. It's version 25.2. And right here, I just installed the most recent version. And since it's the free version, you don't have to install a license. But if you were going to license it, you would just go ahead and launch the license manager and apply your license. And it puts it on the server that you're installing it on one time. So if you only get one of their products and you need another one, the license manager knows that and it will go ahead and just make sure it's all licensed properly. I'm just going to click finish. And here you can see some of the other tools I mentioned, Visual Studio, and I have Node.js environment set up on here, as well as Python and NPM and things like that. And here we have the SQL Server Integration Services projects, which I'm going to show that in a moment, as well as a few other tools, including Docker Desktop. I've used that in other videos, but I won't be using it here. So here are some of the things it can do. Deal with JSON files, lots of cool things there. XML processing. It has all these premium tools that you can use, like derived columns and ADO.NET to basically help you do your automations without any programming. It's a low code, if not no code platform. You can do address verifications, NoSQL, message queuing, PGP encryption. It has lots of things for that. SFTP, timer tasks, SMTPs, email services. And here is basically like an overview of how you connect the different nodes back to back. And so you have like a upstream node at the top, the JSON source. You do a conditional split. Then you can write some information into a database, then extract the JSON, use a derived column, send an HTTP request, and it just goes on and on and on. It's pretty much limitless. It is integrated with Visual Studio. And here is the list of 300 plus components. I'll just scroll through a few of them, but feel free to check out their webpage if you want to know more to see if it might support something that you need to build or work on. It does save a lot of time. Here's the licensing page. So you can see right here, their software comes with the free developer license included after the installation. So you don't even have to do anything once you install it. They go on to say, under the free license, you may develop these SSIS packages, which is what we're going to look at in a moment, and execute them inside of Visual Studio. And you do not need a commercial license, so you can build and test everything for free. And really, you can do pretty much everything there. However, when you want to deploy it to the server, which in this case is part of the SQL Server, then you will need a license before you can run it. You can actually deploy it, but you won't be able to run it without your key. So then you're going to want a SQL Server, and here I included links for all of these in my video description. Right here you see the SQL Server 2025 Developer Edition. I don't know if you can still download older versions, which I have a slightly older version here on this machine. So you can download the Developer SQL Server, which has basically enterprise features, but you just are limited in like how much you can use it or do with it. The next thing is this SQL Server Integration Services Projects, SSIS. You'll need to download this after you have your Visual Studio installed. And as they say here, this project may be used for building high-performance data integration and workflow solutions, including extraction, transformation, and loading, ETL operations for data warehousing, and pretty much anything else. So you will have to install that. Once you do that, I'll show you in SQL Server and in Visual Studio where it shows up. For more information about installing SSIS, if you haven't done that before, there is a link in the description that talks about how to do that. There's also some other tools. There's also some other tools called the SQL Server Data Tools. I'm not going to be talking about those today, but I will include a link in the description if you're interested. It's a set of development tools in Visual Studio with the focus on building SQL Server databases and Azure SQL databases. Then of course we have our Visual Studio. So right here I'm on the Visual Studio community page, and I highlighted any individual developer can use Visual Studio Community to create their own free or paid apps and deploy them. So let's go ahead and get into more details now. That is an overview of the free tools that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. So let's go ahead and get into more details now. I have a few tools here to open and show you the VS Code, which has my Python code in it that we'll talk about in this video and likely the next video in case this goes too long. I have the SQL Server opened up so we can take a look at that, and the SSIS services. And I also have Visual Studio opened up here, which has the automation DTS package in it. We'll go ahead and start here on the Python side. If I open up this test Python program, this is something that I put together to use inside of the backend automation platform, and as well as testing on the server. Now this could do really anything that you need your Python code to do. In my case, it's a pretty basic Python program. It's structured and it creates a file here for us, and we'll take a look at what it writes in there. It's just a basic Python program, but the main purpose of it is to use it inside of the SSIS server and DTSX package. That's this here. There's going to be multiple steps here to call the Python programs. The Python programs will use the AI, Google Gemini and Google Nano Banana to produce various different outputs like text files, text information, images, and a storybook. So this Python program is really meant, like I would say, a test harness to make sure that your SSIS and Visual Studio is all set up and working. Now I have these other Python programs. They're broken into 4 pieces. The first one generates 5 unique chapters using Gemini AI. Currently it's using the Gemini 2.5 Flash, but I am going to use the newer version of Gemini. And images Python program does ask for the API key interactively, so it doesn't store it on disk, and it will generate images that will be used in the storybook that we're going to create. Also, this is number 3, the output. This is the third Python program that will create more outputs for us using the other information that was generated in the other Python programs. And the number 4 Python program will make a HTML with a lightbox, a responsive web page that has our AI generated story and our AI generated images. Here is the storybook itself. I can go ahead and preview it here. This storybook is generated dynamically from the outputs of these other files, which could be any kind of information, any kind of business information or personal information, whatever you really need to generate. This is just an example. Let's go ahead and preview this. So here we have my AI storybook. These images, we can click on them and it makes them large so you can see the pictures. Right now the images are unavailable. That's because I've gone past my quota using the free Gemini. I will be fixing that a little bit later. And so this is the web page that it creates that has your story or information or report, whatever it really needs to be, all generated from your prompts. And here is another view of the storybook that has the AI generated information along with the images that go along with it. And again, since my credits have basically expired, I have to plug in a different key. And down at the bottom, we can see here, it was made with love using Gemini and Nano, as well as Python code. There is the overview of the Python files and what they do. Let's move on to the next section, which will be about the Visual Studio and Python. I also forgot to show this. It's a document or documentation about the AI storybook generation pipeline, the full documentation. So I wrote this just to kind of give an overview and some more details about each of the 4 Python scripts that work together in sequence to create a complete interactive AI generated storybook complete with chapters and pictures. I probably should have showed this first. Anyway, so it shows the purpose and the key features of each of the Python programs that will be looking at the output of them. And you can see the folder structure there and file structure. With that said, let's get into the Visual Studio. This is how I created my project in the first place. I went into Visual Studio and told it to create a new project. Once you've installed all that software, especially the SSIS Integration Toolkit, you will see this integration services project. Since I used it recently, that's why it shows up there, but you can also find it by going into the search box and typing integration. Then here we'll see integration services project. This project may be used for building high performance data integration and workflow solutions that can be run on SSIS catalog, including extraction, transformation, loading, operations for data warehouses, really reaching out to all those 300 different types of services or files or platforms, calling APIs, doing everything securely, and so forth. I'll go ahead and create a new project. It wants to know the name of it. We'll just go ahead and leave it as a default. We'll place the solution and project in the same directory and click create. When you get started up, it's an empty platform to start with. I just want you to see that. You would start dragging and dropping your tools over here onto, this is called the control flow, and more individual data flows get added inside of here. They also have favorites because it knows what you might want to do here on this part of the solution. So you can drag a data flow task over there, or if you had SQL code that you wanted to execute, you can drag that over there, as well as all these other different common tools. Azure functions, compression tasks, bulk inserts, Databricks. You can execute processes, deal with FTP, deal with Google, HTTP requester task, which I've used that, and the JSON extract task. Those are really nice. Postgres SQL commands, and all these other things. That's basically how you create a new project, and then you start dragging and dropping. Another important thing is you have to add connections to your database or files. If you're dealing with flat files, you also can just create a new connection or new file connection. It depends on what you're trying to do. Here we have none, so I'll click new. This is where you can select a server name if it shows up. If not, you can just paste it in there. I use Windows authentication since these are Windows machines. And then once you have that put in there, you can select which database you want to connect to and have a test connection. Once you do that, it's just that simple. You click a couple things and your database connection is all set up. Anyway, let's get out of this default project and go over to my real project. We don't need to save any of that. So here we are back in my main project for this video. Here we have a task that is going to call my Python code to ensure the files are going to work from within the DTSX package before we get into the other steps of calling the other Python code. This is where we can pass in variables and also have a place to write information back out of the scripts. And here, if I click on Edit Script, this takes us into the Visual Studio experience for writing C# code. And C# code, since this is running on a Windows environment, can pretty much be used to do whatever you need to do over in the C# code. If we scroll down a little bit, we can take a look at some of the details, but it's nice that it puts in helpful tips here about the script task, and it puts in some namespaces that you're going to need and some other really helpful information to get you going. But down here, since we're going to be calling a Python script, I set up the Python environment with a couple of string variables here and let it know where Python exists. So it's in my C drive in the Python 3.12. And the Python script is the one that we looked at earlier, the testpython.py. It's going to grab some process information and output some other basic information and then exit out of this script. And then when it gets back, this is a way to, again, make this save automation solution platform output do anything that you need to. What's in that toolbox is not enough. You have the option just by clicking a couple buttons here to link into your C# code by clicking that edit script. I'm not using anything else here in these other tabs. That will call the Python code. Now let's look at the data flow task. I dragged this from the toolbox over here. And now that we're inside of the data flow up here in this tab, there's actually a lot more that you can do. Let's go over there and take a look. When I said there was like 300 different things you can do, you can see the long list of all the different objects you can start with. You just simply drag and drop them right here on the screen, and then without coding, you can just click on the options. It really does speed up so many different tasks. It's pretty amazing. It has things grouped together here. Other sources. We can close that. Other transforms. Lots of different options there. So sources, where you're getting your data from, and destinations, where you're writing it to. But let's go ahead and take a look at this. This is another basic script, and it's going to pass in the Python output, which is what we set in our user variable. That's down. I didn't mention that, but that's, you have ways to monitor, kind of like in global variables, that the entire package knows about or each task knows about. I set a batch ID to a value of 1001 just as an example, and that can be passed through this whole platform. Python output is a string. That's where it gets saved. So when we come into this task, we can see right here it's going to use the user variable called Python output. And if we go into the script, again, this just shows we can call a C# script that does something else that we need. I do put it to sleep as part of the demo for 5 seconds. When I run it, you'll see that. And it goes ahead and takes the Python output and adds it back to our output text. That's all it does. Really just meant as a demonstration of moving information through the system, running Python, generating information, pushing it into and out of these different tasks. Again, depending on what you need to do, these types of things are quite common. And then the last thing, we're going to write it into the Python flat file right here. There's a drop down, and I only have one in there right now. And that's this connection manager. that I mentioned before. Here we can see the name and the location of where it's going to write the information into. There's lots of different configurations you can do here. It just depends again on what you're trying to accomplish. In my case, I just wanted to output that information that came from Python generated by calling it from this automation platform. And then it writes it into this flat file. If we look at mappings, this just says, hey, take the output Python text and write it into the file. There's something else to point out. You can use parameters. I mentioned in the overview about environments and passing around parameters and dynamic values. Right here, this is called put runtime value here. That's just the name that I called a parameter. I will show that a little bit later, how we can pass in a value. This value in this parameter can then be used in all of the different tasks. So you can have it run on a development server, on an integration server, on a testing server, or production. Each one could have a different value. And without changing any code, without redeploying anything, you can just change it over on the server, where I'll show you where you can change it. And then it just gets passed down, and it can be right here. You can add lots of different values and data types. There's event handlers. I'm not using them. Since I don't have a lot in here, there's not a lot to show. The package explorer is nice depending on what you're looking for. All of our variables, there's some system variables that are always available. And the user that I showed you down here in the bottom left is the batch ID. And also our Python output, so they show up there under variables. I'll hit save even though I didn't really make any changes. That's okay. I'm going to go ahead and run it now. This is Visual Studio. And if we just click the start button, we're going to go ahead and see it run. And what it will do is generate the log folder. So we can see when it was generated last time at 2:51. Now it's going to update that file and put new information in it from this running process, which could be anything. Let's go ahead and run it. This is what happens when you deploy it and run it on the server. There's my 5-second delay. Normally it would be already done. And it finished. And if we go look again, these things can be massive. You can have dozens, if not hundreds of different nodes in here. And this is the data flow that I showed. We can see that it passed one row or one set of information, but you could have 1,000, 10,000, 1,000,000. It all depends on what you're trying to do. So now it ran. Let's go look at that again. And here we can see 4:10 p.m. Let's go ahead and open it up and see what's in there. So here we have the information created from the Python script. It just says the name of the script. It tells us where it was located, what our working directory is, what the log file is, the thing we're looking at, the parameter that was received. So the Python knows also that I passed in a parameter as well as this SSIS package itself. The environment information tells us the version of Python that we're using and some other environmental variables. And then it does a test. It determines if we can write to the folder of where this is running inside of the SSIS package. And we can see here, yes, it did. It created the SSIS test success.txt file. And then it just says, hey, we're done. That's basically it in a nutshell. This proves when you see this file, and this also, it knows that it called it successfully. So you know that everything is up and running as far as making sure your SSIS package can talk to the Python. That's going to be important before anything else can be done, and we can call the other pieces of the Python scripts that I showed before. Using this automation platform, you really can do almost anything that needs to be done. And it's done in a way that saves an incredible amount of time because you're just dragging and dropping nodes around on a screen, setting properties. Of course, you still have to think logically and lay everything out. And the more you design it ahead of time, the faster it goes. It really is an amazing platform. And using Kingswaysoft also has all these other premium components, as I was saying. I've used a bunch of different ones, and it's really a great platform to save a lot of time. I'm going to show now how to deploy this to the server. But first, I will show the server. So here we're over on our SQL server. which is locally running on this machine. And right here, since I've already published this, I've created a job and I could use the scheduler to schedule it. You can just right click and go into the properties and you can set a schedule if you need this automation to run once a minute, once a day, once a week, whatever it is. The scheduler is pretty flexible, I would say. And here we have the integration services catalog, the SSIS database, which is all built in when you install the software. And here we have a project that I called Python, an AI storybook. And then we have the AI storybook automation. This is what the jobs down here are calling. They look into the catalog here and allow you to select something that you want to automate. So if I open up this job that I created, I called it the Run Python AI Storybook Creator. And it will have multiple steps. Right now for this video, I have it just called the first Python program that we looked at. I set the owner to SA, and then we go into the steps. There's also the scheduler. Like I said, you can create a new schedule, which is very flexible. If you want to set up alerts, like for email or whatever, you can do that. Also, when the job fails, like if I forced it to fail, we could go and look in the Windows application log and it automatically writes one there. You can also send emails or pages here. In our case, all we care about right here is step 1. You could have 1 step, 5 steps, 20 steps, 50 steps, whatever, however complicated or complex your script or automation needs to be. You can have as many steps as you need. In our case, for this video, we just have this 1 step for right now. And so here it has a type, which is called the SQL Server Integration Services Packages. That goes along with the software that I mentioned in the beginning that you have to install from SQL Server. And it gets installed here in the server, as you can see over on the left. So now we know that we're going to be calling a integration services packages, which is what we just programmed and looked at inside of Visual Studio. We have to tell it where the package source is. It's the SSIS catalog, which matches with this over here on the left. And we give it the name of the server. And I'm just using Windows authentication, but you could use SQL Server authentication if you need to. And then you can pick the package that you want to run. Normally you could have dozens or hundreds of them on a server loaded up. Here I would just pick this and click OK, but I've already done that, so I don't need to do that again. I mentioned about environment values and parameters. If you remember, put the runtime value here. So we could like put in a value, let's say, because this was production, it needed to be 1005. Then click OK. Now it knows when it runs this package on this server, whether it's the development server or a test server or a production server, whatever the value you need to pass in, you can do it right here, which means you don't have to change code, you don't have to redeploy it or anything like that. So it's really nice to use these parameters over here. There's also the connection manager, which we don't need to change that in this case. We're using a file, but it could be a SQL server or any one of those other server components. And there's also property overrides here, but we're not going to be using them. You can change the logging level, which I'll show that also, where that makes a difference. It depends on what you're doing. Sometimes they can generate massive amounts of logging, even if you turn it to none. I'll leave it on basic for now, but you can, when you're debugging things, set it to performance or verbose, or you can select a custom logging level, which I have done that before. Let's go ahead and get out of this now. So we can see that it's going to call my package AI Storybook Automation. That's the most important thing when this gets run. To run it, we just right click and say start job at step, and it will go ahead and start at step 1 because there's only 1 step. Now let's take a look at a couple other things here. You notice this word environment. This is all relative to the project that I'm in, and I called this Python. So for my Python project or folder, I could create my own environment. Right here, you right click and you say create environment. From there, you could give it a name and a description. Once you have that environment set up, you can set up like your values or variables in that environment. And so depending on if you're on production or a test server, you can set up different environments and pass in certain values. Again, to help with automation and to save you from having to change anything. You don't have to change any code. You just change these environment variables and it will run with that information without redeploying any code. Again, all these things end up saving a lot of time. So that's what the server side looks like. Now let's go back to the Visual Studio and I'll show you how to publish this AI Storybook automation. If I right click and say deploy, it goes through a wizard, which is pretty helpful. If you don't want to see it again, you can click do not show this page again. And then I'm going to store it in my SSIS DB hosted on SQL Server. That's the main option that I use. So let's click next. And here you would put in the server name. It already knows because I've done this before. And I'm just going to use Windows authentication. Notice down here it's not enabled. It's because I haven't connected yet. So right there it just did a authentication behind the scenes. And here's where I can browse and tell it where I want to put this thing. So as I showed in the SQL Server, it's called AI Storybook. And we can pull that up again. We can see right there it's called AI Storybook. So that's how those match up. And then I will click OK. And then I can click Next. I haven't made any changes, but I'll just go ahead and deploy it anyway so you can see. It just takes really a few seconds. It depends on the size of the package that you're publishing. And we'll close out of that. So we have shown how to set up all these tools, how to start up a new automation project, how to call Python, how to verify the Python's working inside this environment, and publish it on the server. And how the server works, how we can set up variables and parameters and jobs and schedule them. I'm just going to go ahead and run it now. So I'll say start job at step, and now you can see that it's running. So let's go ahead and let it finish. It only takes a second. So now it's finished. Let's close. We can verify that if we go back to the folder. Here we can see 4:22 p.m. And if we go look in there, we can see that it has the information that it just created. So now we know that we can publish an automation tool that can link into Python, that can be scheduled, and that can call multiple different Python programs, which is what we're going to do. It looks like it'll be a follow-on video because this video is getting fairly long. Here, if we right-click on this package, we can go to reports and say all executions. This is very useful when you're monitoring your ETLs, like nightly ETL processes that you may have built with this system. I can click on overview, and it shows me the basic steps. If you pass in any parameters or have any property overrides, you can see that here. Right here is that put runtime value. Since I didn't pass in anything, it still says 0. If we go into all messages and we scroll down, this gives a breakdown, and this has to do with that logging parameter that I showed. There's kind of a lot of information here. If you don't need to see all this, then you can set it to none. And it does cut down substantially. It all depends on what your automation does. Sometimes it can still create information, and sometimes a lot. It depends on how the tools work that you've used in your Visual Studio project. If we scroll down a little bit, I intentionally had it write information out to this SSIS server. It's the same information basically that we looked at in the log file. So depending on what you're trying to do, you could write information over here for like debugging purposes, or if you wanted to see certain record counts or really anything that you can think of that you might need, you could write it over here to help you ensure that your project is working correctly. One of the things I will want to do next is to change this job and to add some more steps to call the other Python programs that we looked at. So in the end, it will do all that for us on a scheduled basis with no human intervention, and it'll do it without any human intervention on the schedule that we needed to be done. If you find out you need to move your steps around, you can move them up and down here. Since we only have one step, it doesn't make sense. But if we wanted to insert a new step, we click this. And we can also do things like run SQL. You can choose your database, and then you can run the commands right here, or enter your commands and then run them. It's one of the nice things to save time if you just need to run some basic SQL or store procedures. Well, I think that wraps up this part, looking at the server and how to deploy things. The server is very flexible. We can schedule things and add numerous different steps however we need to build our automation. Back in Visual Studio, it gets into the weeds about exactly what you need to do, and we saw the toolbox. You have all these different tools for many different things. It's very flexible and it's fun and easy to use. Your connection manager, if you wanted to connect to a database or some of these other connections, you would just add them in here with another wizard. Again, it saves a lot of time. You have all these properties over here on the left side. Since I'm just clicked on the main surface, we just see a high level of all these different properties. And you'll also see things like protection level and package passwords and things like that, depending. You may sometimes need to use that. You also have things called expressions that you can fill in. If we go here to our flat file, we'll see expressions. There's nothing in there right now because I haven't set any up, but you could set up your properties and your expressions using another wizard, basically. Very flexible. Let's move back to the Python code for a moment. I will show one other thing here. If you need to add variables, you just click this little button here, and then you can add your variable. You can choose the scope of what it should be. Let's change this a little bit here. We can specify the expression. You can evaluate it. You can use all these different mathematical functions, string functions, date time, typecast operators, lots of different things here. The data type, lots of different data types to choose from. And you can set an initial value if you need to. And if you do create an expression, it will show up here in this area. Sometimes there can be dozens of different variables that you're using. And as I mentioned before, the parameter is a package level parameter, can supply values back over in the runtime environment as I showed before. Let's go ahead and let it run one more time. I'll be back in 1 second when it finishes. I wanted to show the progress. I hadn't done that before. When you're testing and debugging things, sometimes it's very valuable to come down here and you can see the progress of your package. And because there's not a lot in this package, there's not a lot of things in here, but large packages can scroll on and on for a long time. You can see when it started and when it finished, and some of the important pieces of the script that it's running or process that it's running. You also have these other windows down here. Sometimes you can get error messages and you can look down here in the output window. You can also set breakpoints if you want to, and you can see a call stack. It depends again. I'm back in the Python program now. The Python programs, again, they work together. They work on information. Step 1 through 4. Step 1 does something. Step 2 may use something from step 1. Step 3, the output may use something from the first step or 2 steps. And then step 4, again, maybe the same thing. It will go ahead and use some of the other information as I showed briefly inside of these files. So what we want to do in the next video will be for me to have that automation platform call each of these individual Python programs. Now we've verified that our runtime environment, both locally on my development machine and on the server, are able to run our automation, which calls Python. So we're sure that's working properly with all the debugging information that we did. Now we can go ahead and have the package and the server, once we deploy it there, run all of these things and work together to make our output, which, as I said, here we have some of the generative AI connections to Gemini to do some work. Magic prompt That gets us some unique chapters. Extract chapters safely. If Gemini fails, we'll make some default ones. Then it saves some information into chapters. Here we want to go ahead and use if nano banana. This code has to be updated. As I said, I ran out of tokens, so I had to default back to some of the lower end models. But I'll be taking a look at that in another video. Well, I hope this was interesting for you to take a look at an alternative way to use a bunch of free tools that you can download yourself, run on a Windows machine, and do all these different types of things. Really limitless amounts of creativity of things you can do with Python, with C#, with automation packages, SQL Server, databases, files, and so forth. It's very powerful and saves a lot of time using this type of technology. I encourage you to take a look, and I wish you a great new year. I also meant to show my diagram again at the end of the video to just kind of recap how we talked about all these different things. We went through a high level of the Python code and how it's broken into separate pieces, and how I want my automation platform to call the Python code, which will invoke the AI on the other side and bring back information used to create dynamic content, which could be anything really. Data files, reports, images, whatever. Our SQL agent that schedules it all, the servers that were involved, API calls to the AI SQL databases. I showed the C# scripts. I showed how we can automate things using these DTSX packages, how we can schedule them, and the SSIS platform in general, how that can be acquired and installed as part of SQL Server, and of course AI and Gemini and Nano Banana. I will have to get further into those in the next video, or a very soon video, where I can change that code and get it linked into a better account that has more access. We looked at Visual Studio. We looked at VS Code briefly just as our editor to preview some of the information. We saw the dynamic report that was created from the Python programs. Also looked at Kingswaysoft, which is an amazing tool, and it's free for developers to use to develop all kinds of things you can imagine and that you need. Also, we saw environment variables on the server side, as well as the parameters on the client side, and how to set them up and how to pass them in to the server side and use them, such as when you're moving between development environments and server production environments, and several other things. So again, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be back with a follow-up just as soon as possible. If you like this channel, please like and subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified when I post new content.